Welcome to Restoration. My name is Matt. So glad you could join us as we continue our series, Blood Brothers, the story of the sons of Jacob. They are one family whose dysfunction becomes the origin story of the people of Israel and the hope of all the families of the world. If you're joining us for the first time, Joseph is his father's favorite of 12 sons, was thrown into a pit by his brothers and sold into slavery at 17. His brothers told their father he was dead. 22 years later, Joseph is the second most powerful man in Egypt, and his family is reunited, settled in Goshen in Egypt, and the famine that brought them is still raging. Last week, we talked about how Jacob, broken, old, describing his days as few and evil, walk into Pharaoh's throne room and bless Pharaoh. It's the first time in the Bible that the blessing of Abraham actually happens where one of the descendants of Abraham blesses a Gentile leader of another nation, as God promised. And it happened in Egypt through a 130-year-old shepherd who couldn't fully feel the good things of his life. So today's message is part 24, and it's called Live and Not Die, which is different than the Paul McCartney song. Not that one. It's Live and Not Die. Genesis 47, verse 13, it says, "Now there was food in all the land because the famine was severe." And the word for severe here in Hebrew is kavod. It actually means heavy. It's the same word that Joseph used in Genesis 41 when he interpreted Pharaoh's dream. He saw the severity of the famine then, and every word he has spoken then is now coming true as they're living through the famine. And in the rest of the verse, it says it was both the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan languished because of the famine. And this Hebrew word is weary or fainting, exhausted under the weight of it. And it's not just Egypt, but it's Canaan too, where the family comes from. Both lands, the same word. The whole known world is collapsing under kavod, under this heavy feeling. And all of this is decreation language. In Genesis 1, God speaks and the land produces. There's seed-bearing fruit, and there's fruit-bearing seed, and there's abundance and multiplication. The famine runs the creation engine in reverse. The land is silent. This is not just an agricultural crisis. It's the world unmaking itself. And the narrator of Genesis wants you to feel it against the flood. The same way the waters overwhelmed the land in Genesis 6 through 9 until nothing outside the ark survived, this famine is now overwhelming all of Egypt and the world, and nothing outside of Joseph's system will survive. It's the same decreation. It's the same helplessness. And there's one man standing between the world and death. Joseph is meant to be seen as the new Noah. Verse 14, it says, Joseph collected all the money that could be found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the grain that they bought. And Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. Now, he had every reason, and as the second in command, in some sense, every right to take whatever he wanted for himself. You have to think about every Egyptian system that touched him, failed him, or almost destroyed him. And now he holds all the power. Now he holds everything. Now he's holding all the money in the world. And he takes nothing for himself. Everything went to Pharaoh's house because of Joseph's integrity. The pit produced a man with no appetite for revenge and no agenda for personal gain. So that when God handed him Egypt and all that came with it, he used the power for Egypt, not for himself. Verse 15, it says, "Then the money of the land of Egypt and the land of Canaan ran out, and all Egypt came to Joseph saying, 'Give us food. Why should we die in front of you because the money's gone?'" I mean, nobody should ever die because the money's gone. But this is a raw cry from the people. "Give us bread. Why should we die just because we don't have money?" And watch Joseph's wisdom in verse 16. It says, Joseph said, "Well then, give me your livestock and I'll give you food for your livestock if the money's gone." So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and Joseph gave them food in exchange for horses, for flocks of sheep, for herds of cattle, and for donkeys. And he provided them with food in exchange for all their livestock that year. No one has any money. No one now has any livestock. The horses, the flocks, the herds, the donkeys, everything they have left. And Joseph receives it all, and in return, he gives them bread. Robert Alter said in his commentary that this phrase, he provided them, in Hebrew, usually means, and actually means, to lead or to shepherd. So the idea is Joseph led the world with bread the way a shepherd leads a flock to water. The man thrown into a pit is now the shepherd of nations, and he keeps nothing for himself. Verse 18, when that year came to an end, they came to him in the second year and they said, we don't hide from our Lord that the money was run out and that the livestock and the domestic animals are now yours. And there's nothing left in my Lord's sight except our bodies and our land. It's the second year. The money's gone. The animals are gone. Now they come with nothing left to offer except themselves. But what's really interesting is this Hebrew phrase, word, our bodies. The word in Hebrew is geviah, and it's not a neutral word for persons. Geviah refers specifically to a dead body, to a corpse. So the Egyptians are not saying we have our bodies left. They're saying we're already dead. We're the walking dead. We're zombies. They didn't say that then, but that's how we would say it now. Or, mummies. That's funny. The famine has decreated them from the inside. They have nothing. They are nothing. And some of you watching know exactly what that feels like. When everything you live for is falling apart around you, when the money is gone and the job is gone and the land is gone and you have nothing, and all you have is the desire to die and not live, because it's also overwhelming. And I want you to know that you are not bad. You are hurting. And God, the God of your fathers, wants you to live. He's not done with your story. And we want to come around you as community and help you live and not die, which is what Joseph does. Verse 19, why should we die before your eyes, the people say, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for food. We and our land will become Pharaoh's slaves. Now notice that Joseph doesn't ask this. He doesn't suggest it. He suggested the livestock for food. Now the Egyptians initiate a proposal to surrender their land and become slaves of Pharaoh. This is voluntary. They're choosing slavery over death. And they say, provide seed so that we may live and not die, and the land won't be deserted. Live and not die. That's the title of the message. The Hebrew word for live is chaya. It's also a name, by the way. Chava, Eve, the mother of all human beings, and now all living beings are crying the same word to Joseph. Silver couldn't buy chaya. Livestock couldn't buy it. Now they're offering everything, land, bodies, freedom, for the only thing Joseph carries, which is a whole lot of grain that he's stored up. The deal is this. Joseph gives them seed. The land is Pharaoh's now. They will work it. And at harvest, 1/5 will go to Pharaoh. 4/5 will be theirs for seed, for food, for their families. By ancient standards, these are actually incredibly generous terms, because Joseph isn't trying to extract from them. He's actually restoring a collapsed world and giving people a way to live. And so the people say in verse 25, you've saved our lives, they said. We find favor in the eyes of my Lord and will be Pharaoh's slaves. Chaya is no longer a cry, it's a declaration. You have saved our lives. The question of live and not die has been answered with life from the man who was dead and is now alive. Verse 27, it says, meanwhile, Israel settled in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen, and acquired property in it, and were fruitful and multiplied greatly. That's Eden, Garden of Eden language. Right? Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. It's the creation mandate. And here it is not in the garden, not in the promised land, but in Goshen, in the place we talked about last week, in a place that doesn't feel like home. The whole world is emptying itself. But Israel in Goshen has everything it needs to grow into a nation that will be the hope of the world. It's like Tov and Ra, good and bad, at the same address, because it's also going to become the place of slavery. But in verse 28 it says, now Jacob lived, Vayechi Yaakov, and Jacob lived, and look how long the Lord gives him. It says Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. 17 years, that's a funny number. It's the same number of years that Joseph spent with Jacob before he was sold into slavery at 17 by his brothers. God gave them back exactly what was taken, not 15 years, not 20, 17. The number is God's signature on the design of the story. But the Hebrew doesn't actually say 17. It says 7 and 10. Sheva and 10. 7 is separated out. You know why 7 matters if you listen to me preach it all in the last few years. It's built into the fabric of creation in Genesis chapter 1. There's 7 days, and it's the number of completeness. And this entire chapter has been both decreation and recreation happening at the same time. Egypt is losing everything. Israel is gaining everything. The world is unmaking itself while the promise is being rebuilt in Goshen for the Jewish people. And right in the middle of all of it is the number 7. The creation number is still threading through the story because God hasn't stopped signing his work. This is part of how ancient Hebrew thought works. So then it says, so the days of Jacob and the years of his life were 147 years. And again, it doesn't say 147 years. It says 7 and 40 and 100 years in Hebrew. But 7 comes first. And the lifespan of the patriarchs carry a similar pattern. Now, this takes me a while because I'm terrible at math, but just roll with me. Abraham is 175 years old. That's 5 times 5 times 7. Isaac was 180 years old. 6 times 6 times 5. Jacob is 147 years old. 7 times 7 times 3. And you know, when you take all 3 of those equations, they all add up to 17. The same number that God wove into the relationship of Jacob and Joseph. 17 years before the pit, 17 years before he dies. It's the same number embedded in the lifespan of every patriarch. And there's one more layer. If you add up all the years that the patriarchs lived in Canaan, Abraham lived there for 25 years, Isaac lived there for 60, and Jacob lived there for 130 years. The total years in the promised land of the 3 patriarchs is 215. The exile in Egypt will be exactly double that, 430 years. Abraham's life began outside the land. Jacob's life ends outside the land. And they bracket the entire promise from outside. The time between them, 250 years in the land, is precisely half the time that their descendants will spend in Egypt. This is how Hebrew math works in the ancient world. And it's done to show that God hasn't stopped signing his work, that the decreation doesn't have the last word. Look at verse 29. It says, as the time of Israel's death drew near, he called for his son Joseph. The word for death is mut in Hebrew. The shadow, which is underneath chaya, life, now it arrives alone. The time for death has come. And Jacob calls his son Joseph close. And what he's about to do is make a covenant with him and pass the covenants of his fathers on. In fact, we're going to spend a long time on all of the blessings that he has for all of his children that come in the next chapters. But the hope of the promise is passed from one generation to the next. And he said to him, if I have found favor in your eyes, then put your hand under my thigh. Gross. That gesture appeared once before in Genesis. Abraham, who's old and approaching death, calls his most trusted servant and places him under an oath. Go to my family. Find a wife for my son Isaac, from my own people. Do not let the covenant line be broken. The future of everything depends on who Isaac marries. And the gesture he uses to seal it is put your hand under my thigh. The reason why it's under the thigh is because it's near the source of where seed comes from. In the ancient world, this is how you bound an oath to the covenant itself. You are not promising. You are swearing on the future descendants and the seed and the line that comes from the person, on everything that God promised about the land and descendants. So it's intentional that he says to Joseph, put your hand under my thigh, like his grandfather did with his servant. And then he says, and show me faithful kindness. This is chesed ve'amet, kindness and faithfulness. The same words used to describe God's loyalty to his own promises throughout the Hebrew Bible. Jacob's not just asking for a favor. He's invoking the covenant that has been held since his grandfather Abraham. And then Joseph says, please do not bury me in Egypt. Verse 30, he says, when I lie down with my fathers, you must carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. So he said, I myself will do according to your word, Joseph said. Do not bury me in Egypt. Bury me in the cave of Machpelah where my fathers are buried. The only land that the patriarchs legally owned in Canaan at that point. The deed to the promise. This is not sentiment. This is not just an old man's preference for his homeland. This is the deathbed request is bound up with the divine promise of redemption and nationhood in the land of Israel. And Jacob believes that God will bring them back because he said so. And he believes that the land holds the promise even if he's dying outside of it. And so his sons will carry his bones ahead as a down payment. My body will be in Canaan, so I will be with you when you return to the land God promised to my fathers. So he says to Joseph, swear it, verse 31. So he swore to him. Hashavah and Vayishava. Both are come from the root word seven. In Hebrew, to swear an oath is to invoke seven. And the number of creation is woven into the language of covenant. So in this chapter, it's Sheva and 10, 17. It's Sheva and 40 and 100, 147. And now it's Hashava and Vayashava. The number woven through the years of this man's life is the same root that seals his faith in the promise that God made. 7 and 7 in the lifespan. Oath and oath in the covenant. God's signature on all of it. Which is why then Israel bowed down in worship on the head of his staff. In some translations it says on the head of his bed. It doesn't matter. The point is, dying and unable to rise, he bows in worship. The word in Hebrew here is shachah. It's to prostrate oneself before the Lord on the ground, to like lay out flat on your stomach. The same word used at every moment of covenant confirmation in the Hebrew Bible. Jacob cannot kneel and he cannot rise, but he can bow his head. And he does because Joseph has sworn, and the promise is moving forward, and the covenant is intact. And the only response to the faithfulness of God, even from a deathbed, even in Egypt, even at the end of a life that he would have described as raw, bad, evil, is to put your face as close to the ground as a dying man can manage and worship the Lord. Joseph couldn't see what his faithfulness through this narrative was building. Jacob couldn't see what God would do with his faith. They couldn't count all the sevens in the story. They didn't see the 215 years, which would be double 430. Only the narrator of Genesis, writing long after, can see how the pattern was threaded, because while it's happening, only God knows. Like he plans things that way. And most of the time, God isn't telling, especially when we're in the middle of it. And our stories are no different. You can't really see what God is doing while he's doing it. We usually can't see it long after, if we get to see it at all. Now the psalmist knew this in Psalm 46, and it's written in the middle of catastrophe and war and kingdoms falling and the earth giving way, and God has already been acting. And then the Lord speaks in Psalm 46 and verse 9, "Come see the works of Adonai, who brings devastations on the earth. He makes wars cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns chariots with fire." God is always working in ways nobody can see, threading his plan through the story of a broken family. And as Jacob bowed in worship, so we must do these well-known words. If you know anything about the Bible, if you've been reading the Bible for any time, you probably know this verse. This verse is probably on a t-shirt, or it's maybe stitched on your underwear, or it's on a mug. Be still and know that I am God. But most translations, like the TLV, say be still. But the Hebrew word is harfu. It doesn't mean to sit quietly. It means to let go, to release your grip, to open your hands, to stop straining, to hold everything together yourself. And so translators render the effect. They say, well, when you release, you become still. But the word itself is more active than stillness. It's not just sit still and don't move. It's an open-handed release of everything that you've been white-knuckling. Harfu. Let go of the need to see the whole pattern. Let go of the outcome that you are convinced is the best or the right or the only outcome that there can be. Let go of the timeline that you've constructed for how God should be working. The plan is his business. The pattern is his to weave. You were never holding it together anyway. So open your hands. And then the second part is to know. In Hebrew is yada, to know not information, not the pattern finally revealed, not the revelation of the great mysteries that no one knows. No, this is a word used for human intimacy. In letting go, we know God, the God who threads his plans through broken families without explaining himself. Broken families like yours and mine. Harfu, yada, let go, and know God. Or as Kurt Franklin once said, let go, let God. The Lord says, in verse 11, I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. Adonai Tzivaot is with us. The God of Jacob is our strong tower. The God of Jacob is not a generic title. It's not the God of the successful or the God of the settled or the God of the ones who have it all figured out. It's the God of Jacob, the man who wrestled, who schemed, who grieved, who said his life was few and evil. His God. And the God of Jacob is our Misgav. Misgav is not just a strong tower. A Misgav is a high refuge. It's a place set above what is overwhelming you. A place that God lifts you to where he is. The famine is kavod, right? It's heavy. It's pressing everything down. But a Misgav lifts you above it. Not out of Egypt. Just above it. To the place where God is. The God of Jacob, the God of 17 years lost and 17 years restored, the God who meets you in the lowest place and lifts you to where he is. That is the God of Jacob. That's the God that Jacob and Joseph both knew. Joseph's faithful action, next step, was to feed the world and keep nothing for himself. Jacob's next faithful action was to call his son close and declare what he believed God would do. This is the same God the disciples of Yeshua knew in the first century. These were not ancient stories to them. This was their God, the God of their father, Jacob, their Misgav, and Jacob's namesake, the brother of Yeshua, wrote to encourage the 12 tribes, Jewish people suffering under Roman occupation. It's in Jacob chapter 4, verse 13. You know it as James. Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such town and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. But you don't know what your life will be like tomorrow. What is your life? For you're like a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Vapor, the Greek word here is atmos. It's a breath or a mist. It's the same image in the Hebrew Bible that is actually Abel's name from Genesis, Havel. His name means vapor because he was there and then his brother killed him and he was gone. The firstborn son outside of the garden, the shortest life in the Bible. And Ecclesiastes runs the same word through the entire Bible. Havel, Havel, Havel. Everything under the sun is a vapor. It's like smoke. So Jacob says in verse 15, if the Lord wills, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. The common Hebrew phrase is im yirtzeh Hashem, if the Lord wills. This is not a religious disclaimer. It's not a polite way of saying maybe. It's a declaration of who is actually in charge of tomorrow. You hold a plan, but you hold your plan with open hands and say, if the Lord wills, if he sees fit, if this is what he's building, then we will live and do this or that. It is harfu in words. It's let go, spoken out loud. You are a mist. Jacob was a mist. Joseph was a mist. And none of them could see the pattern while God was weaving it. And you cannot see it either. And God is not telling. In verse 17, he says, therefore, whoever knows the right thing to do and does not do it, for him it is sin. And some of you know exactly what the next right thing to do is. You just don't want to do it. And Jacob, the brother of Yeshua, calls that sin intentional. It's missing the mark. Some of you genuinely don't know what the right thing to do is. That's not sin. That's where you are. Harfu is let go of the straining. Yada is to know him. The next step tends to become clear when you stop trying to see the whole pattern at once. And some of us are so convinced that you know what the right thing to do is, but the problem is the plan's yours. It's not his. And that's the arrogance of mapping tomorrow as if you can see it better than God. Look, for everybody, the answer is the same. Harfu, Yada, Im Yitzeh Hashem. Let go. No, if the Lord wills. Love you guys, and I'll see you next week.